became a big problem because the Israelites, they served an invisible God, just like we do today. I know we have the Bible, they had the commandments, they had stories to kind of gear their faith, but you couldn't see their God, you couldn't feel their God. And then they looked around and they had neighboring people who had a king that represented their God. Because in those days, the kings were the God. They could make images that could represent their God. So adultery became the first big problem. And then you look from the beginning of Judges to the end, there was like a downward spiral from just a little bad to worse. And throughout Judges, you have this vicious cycle where the children of Israelite keep getting into issues. So the cycle started out as this: there was peace, then the Israelites rebelled, then God allowed an foreign country to oppress them. They cried out, they repented, and then God will raise up a judge. Now, when these judges, I don't want you to think courtroom, hammer. That wasn't the kind of judge we're talking about. These judges were political and military leaders. They were leaders in the day and time. So you have this vicious cycle, and it kept happening over and over and over again, all throughout the book of Judges, all throughout the history was recorded. The children of Israelites, they had peace, they rebelled, they got oppressed by a king and a government. They cried out, they repented, and then a judge, God will raise up a judge to deliver them. So if you look at our text, chapter 4, we're introduced to this same cycle in the very first few verses 1 through 3. Introduces us to that same cycle. It starts out with the judge of Ehud. Now, Ehud was a judge prior to Deborah being the judge. She's a judge in this story. He was known for removing idols. I think y'all did a lesson about him a few weeks ago. He reigned for 80 years, the longest time the Israelites were in peace. So for 80 years they had peace. But in verse 1, it starts out with, "And Israel did evil in the sight of God's eyes." They did evil. So they rebelled. You have peace, you have rebel, and then have to talk. In the second verse, it keeps going in and out. I'm sorry, y'all. In the second verse, it introduces us to King Jabin. Now, Jabin was the king of the Canaanites, and he would later, he became the oppressor. He oppressed the Israelites for 20 years, and he did this by his general Sisera. Now, Sisera historians said that his army, he was the general of the Canaanite army, and he had a humongous army. Some say that he had an army of over 300,000. But our text, chapter 4, keeps referring to his 900 chariots. This was a unit in his army. It was his secret weapon. It's what made him powerful. And it's going to be a big part of this story, so remember that. 900 chariots. And chariots in today's day and time is like an army tank. It could be 2 to 3 men in that chariot, and they had the best weaponry. So he had a big army, and he was able to keep the Israelites in check, if you will. So during this time, not in chapter 4, but in chapter 5, during the song, Deborah kind of tells us, she fills in the gap. She tells us how it was living during that time frame. She said the streets were empty, commerce didn't go on. People were afraid to come out the house. They were afraid to run and do errands. They were afraid to go to the market and buy stuff because of the cruelty of Sisera and this army. So they were at home hiding. So in verse 3, at the end of verse 3, it says, the children of Israel cried out. Again, the cycle. Peace, rebellion, oppression. Now we're at repentance. We're not even 3 verses into the narrative, and we're halfway through the cycle. Now they're ready to repent. And in verse 4, it introduces us to Deborah. Deborah was a judge at that time. And the Bible tells us that she's a prophetess. She's a wife, a Lapideth. I don't even know if I'm saying it right. His name is a little hard to pronounce. She was a wife, she was a mother, and she was a judge. And I want to stop there for one moment and just encourage the women here, because this text is ultimately about brave women. And I think sometimes in our society that it kind of leads us to believe that in order to be independent or be successful or have goals, we got to wait on being a wife. You have to wait on having kids. And I'm not one to say you should get married as soon as you get out of high school. No. But Just because you're a stay-at-home mom or you're a wife and have kids does not mean that you can't be influential. I love how this text says that she's a mother. In chapter 5, she describes herself as the mother of Israel. It tells us that she's a wife, but she's also a leader, a military leader of Israel at the time. She's also a very brave, important judge. And at this time, one of the most famous leaders in Israel. She was one of the first female leaders in Israel. So you can still accomplish your goals. You can still have a family and pursue dreams. It's nothing wrong with that. You can still be influential. You can work in church. You can have a life. So just to speak a little bit on counterculture, I love how this text brings out that she is a well-rounded woman, but she still had a set purpose by God, and she still has some distinctive characters. So we have Deborah, who is a judge, and then we're introduced to the captain of the Israelite army, who is, Tim says his name is pronounced Barak, but my Bible app says it's Barack, and it's easier for me because Barack Obama. But anyways, Barak or Barack, however you pronounce his name, he is the captain of the Israelite army. And let me tell you, he is probably one of the most scariest individuals I think I've ever seen. Not in the NIV, but in some translations, when Deborah calls for him, she asks him a question. Why have you not followed God as he instructed? Have not God instructed you to go against Sisera? So this text suggests that God has already given the instruction for him to go fight the Canaanite army, but he's hesitating because he's scared. And you know what? I really don't blame him. I really think I would be a Barak in this situation because the Israelites didn't have any blacksmiths. They didn't have no weaponry. They had clubs and sticks. They were all farmers. This man had he had a small unit of 900 chariots. And that's not even all of his soldiers. He had the best weaponry. He had the best and most skilled soldiers. So no, of course, you wouldn't just run half-cocked up against one of the biggest generals of that time who's been oppressing your land for 20 years. But God had given Barak a word and he was hesitant. So Deborah calls him out. She says, I need you to go and fight. And you know what his reply was? If you go, I'll go. If you go, I'll go, but if you don't go, I won't go. And you know, this is no slight to women, but we talk about the general of a whole army is telling his leader or telling everybody that he's not going to war unless a woman go with him. I mean, he puts the phrase into someone needed a hand held. He's not going to do it. He just tells them, point out a blank. You can go with me and I'll go, but if you don't go, I'm not going. So Deborah, being the kind of brave and courageous woman she is, she decides to go. She said, yes, I'll go. But catch this. In verse 9, she says, because you've taken this course, you're not going to get the glory. You're not going to kill Sisera. A woman will. So this is where this story gets interesting. They go to Mount Tabor and they set up camp. And it's where the valley of the Kishon River is. And they're waiting for him. And then we have somebody else introduced to the story. Eber, my Bible app says Eber. He's a Kenite. The Kenites are real interesting. They're not Jewish, but they're distant cousins to the Jewish people. They actually descend from Jethro, Moses' father-in-law. And because Moses intermarried with Jethro's daughter, they started serving the one true God, and they actually started living with the people of Israel. So Judges tells us in the first couple of chapters that the Kenites settled in Jericho. But Eber, of course, I forgot to mention, he's actually the husband of the woman we're talking about today, Jael. He's her husband. For whatever reason, they decide to pack up and leave Jericho, and now they're living in Canaanite territory. And the text suggests to us that they're not only worshiping with the Canaanites, but he's been a spy. In verse 11 and 12, he warns King Jabin and Sisera that of what Barak and Deborah are doing. He tells them their battle scheme, their battle plan, where they camped out, how many soldiers. He tells them that Barak and Deborah are in the valley of Kishon with 10,000 soldiers. And to Sisera, this was a small army. 10,000 soldiers wasn't a lot of people. The text keeps telling us 10,000. So, of course,
the Canaanite army goes in pursuit of them. And it looks as if, this is going to be bad, but it actually was part of God's plan. Now, I know I'm supposed to be talking about JL, but what it interested me the most was this battle because it was kind of tight. I like it. And it doesn't tell it spelled all the way out in chapter 4. Chapter 5, when Deborah sings her song, she gives us the details. So here's what happened, and then I promise we're going to talk about JL. So the general of the Canaanite army goes and pursues him, and he takes a secret weapon. He takes some soldiers, but he takes 900 chariots. So he's ready to do damage. He's ready to put them to bed. And what happens is two things happen, and it was all part of God's plan. Deborah tells us that other Israelite tribes joined them. So Barak has 10,000, but she tells us that the tribe of Benjamin, the tribe of Ephraim, the tribe of Issachar, they also joins them. They bring 10,000 each. So now the Israelite army is about 40,000. It doesn't spell that out in the chapter 4 narrative, but that's what happens. So the general of the Canaanite army thinks that he's about to advance on an army of 10,000, when really he's about to advance on an army of 40,000. Now, that's one thing that happens. The second thing that happens is, so the Israelite army, they're in the Mount Tabor, they're in the mountains, and then you have the Kishon River in the valley. So because they have the chariots, they have to go through the valley. And the second thing that happens is God sends down a rainstorm, and it rains so hard it floods out the Kishon River. So we're talking about chariots. They're not boats. They have to ride on ground. The Kishon River floods out, and it makes that 900 chariots obsolete. They're stuck. They can't move. So essentially, they're sitting ducks. And that's when Barak and Deborah advance, and they kill the whole army. Now, where our person comes in, she has a small part, but she comes in. Sisera somehow, the captain or the general of the Canaanite army, he somehow gets away. He flees. He takes off running. And he comes to Eber's camp. And, of course, I already told you that Eber was a spy for them. So he thought that he was safe. Jael, his wife, comes out, and she greets him and tells him to come to his tent. She wraps him in a blanket. He tells her that he's thirsty, and he asks her for water. And she gives him curd milk. Now, that's interesting, because the fact that she gives him curd milk indicates to us that she meant to kill him. And here's why. Because curd milk, they have, I asked my wife what it's called, but it has like a property in it, melatonin, or what you use to put kids to sleep. Turkey has the same thing. So warm milk can sometimes relax you. If you've been famished from fighting, she gives them this curd milk, which is warm goat milk, real thick, and it puts them to sleep. Now, the Kenites were a nomadic tribe, and the women were responsible for putting up the tent. So I say that to say she knew how to use a hammer. So he goes to sleep, and she takes a tent peg that's meant to be driven in the ground. She walks up to him and puts it right on his temple, and takes that hammer and smashes it into his head, crushing his skull, of course, killing him. So our character today is this woman, and she only has a job because Barak refused to go, and the word of the Lord came to Deborah and said, since you have taken this course, a woman will kill Sisera. So she is that woman that kills the general of the Canaanite army, and she did it with a tent peg and a hammer. Now, before we get into our discussions, I was trying to figure out, because 5 days ago I didn't know this woman, this story even existed. So I studied with Tim, and he said, humor is a good way to help people drive in this point. And when I was little, I always wanted to be a comedian. So I prepared some jokes. He helped me prepare some jokes about this. Now, disclaimer, I've already told the jokes to my wife, and she did not laugh at one of them. But I figured that she's just a bad audience, and I didn't want to be fearful and not do it. She even went so far as to tell me that I wasn't funny and don't do it. But I'm going to tell the jokes. If they're funny, laugh. If they're not funny, please be silent. I'll just cross it out. Honesty is the best policy. I don't want to try to become a comedian if I don't have no business. Please don't have me in a club, telling bad jokes. So here I go. I'm just gonna tell them to you, and if they work, I'll put a check mark. If I get a laugh, I'll put a check mark. If you don't laugh, I'll cross them out. Okay. If JL was living in America today, her name would be Peggy. Ba-da-dum-boom. I gotta laugh. Okay. Okay. The milk that JL gave him was spiked. Ba-da-dum-boom. No. Okay. Okay, let's try another one. When Cicero drank the milk, he got hammered. Okay. That's a good one. Okay. I'll keep that one. See, my wife was wrong. Okay. All right. Here's another one. At least he was well grounded. Ba-da-dum-boom. I got some booze. Okay, I'll mark that one out. Okay. The murder scene was intense. Like intense. Oh, you got it. I got to check that one. Okay. Here's another one. She tried to make an appointment, but he was hard to nail down. Oh, good one. Gotta laugh. Okay. I'm not gonna bore you with my jokes anymore. I've already hammered this down. I laughed. I thought that was mine. Okay, I'm done. That's my comedian part. My comic review. All right, so I just want to notice too. I want to ask if you all notice. There's three things I want you to notice here, and I'm done. Number one, did you notice the cultural differences? Because during this time, male figures were extremely male dominant. It's very weird for a woman to be a ruler, and during that day and time, it was a sign of humiliation to be killed by a woman. A man in the army would have rather taken his own life to be killed by a woman. So the author here, God here, specifically chooses to use women for a reason. Anybody know where I'm getting at? Because of the fear. Did you notice that all the men in this story were fearful? Barak didn't want to go to war, refused to go without unless a woman accompanied him. Look at Eber. He's not Jewish, but he's part of that clan. He's grew up with them. He lived with them. He moves to Canaanite territory. He's helping the Canaanites. He's spying for them. The text doesn't tell us why, but it sounds like a real scared move. His wife kills the general. Deborah initiates. So all the men are very fearful. All the men are very cowardice. All the men are very hesitant in this story. But the women, they're brave. They're courageous. They initiate. They're not afraid. They crushing people's head with hammers and tent pegs. Do you see the stark contrast between the men and the women in this story? The women are all brave and courageous. The men are hesitant and cowardice and not willing to act, where the women just taking people by the hammer and just crushing their heads in. So God is trying to show us something here, that sometimes when we allow fear to hesitate us, to challenge us, he's not so willing to use us. So Barak, at that time in history, is the captain of the Israelite army. But he misses the glory. He's not even talked about as the victor. A woman is. You see that? Barak has the opportunity to lead the Israelite army. But he's not the leader. Deborah's the leader. Because of fear, he kind of missed his opportunity. Where the women, because of their courage, they seized the moment, and now they're talked about. The main character of our story is Jael and Deborah. We don't talk about Barak and Eber. They're the supporting cast. So the contrast between fear and faith is really prevalent here. Those who are fearful, God tend not to want to use. But those who exercise their faith, God is behind in a mighty way. They're described as courageous. And then, so you have the gender thing, and that further highlights the faith and fear contrast. So this whole text is about faith versus fear. Will you allow fear to challenge or stop you? Would you hesitate in cowardice? Or would you act in faith? Would you step out, believe, and stand on God's word and be the victim? And I'm done. Thank y'all. Y'all are a great audience. And thank y'all for the laughs. I hope I didn't get any sympathy laughs.